They're not warning you, but they've already moved. Central banks just made the largest shift in global finance since Bretton Woods, and no one told you. 3,038 tons of gold purchased in 36 months? That's over $260 billion in metal, physically vaulted, quietly repatriated, and completely off the radar of 99% of investors. At the exact same time, over $750 billion in U.S. treasuries vanished from foreign central bank balance sheets. That's not diversification. That's an evacuation. The U.S. is $37.1 trillion in debt, and adding $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest costs just crossed $1.3 trillion per year, more than Social Security, more than defense, more than anything. And the buyers? The Fed is the buyer of last resort. That's code for, we print the money to fund our own deficit. That's not sustainable. That's endgame. This is what the insiders see. This is why the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of Russia, and the Reserve Bank of India are hoarding gold like it's wartime. Because it is. Financial war. Currency war. And when the next phase hits, you'll either be holding what they're holding or watching your dollars go up in smoke. Let me show you what they're preparing for. You know what's crazy? The U.S. doesn't even have to default on its debt for the system to collapse. All it takes is for trust to disappear. And that trust, international trust in the dollar, is already vaporizing right in front of us. Let me show you something nobody on CNBC is talking about. According to the IMF's latest reserve composition data, global central banks have been quietly dumping dollars. Not loudly, not in a panic, but methodically. In 1999, 71% of the world's foreign exchange reserves were in dollars. As of 2024, that number is 58%, and falling faster than ever. And this isn't just some temporary shift. This is a long-term structural trend. Europe's share is flat. The Chinese yuan is climbing. But here's the kicker. The fastest-growing reserve asset isn't a currency at all. It's gold. That's right. Central banks are treating gold like a shadow currency. The anti-dollar. A silent protest against U.S. debt addiction. Why? Because they see the debt spiral coming, and they know the clock is running out. Look at this. U.S. federal debt hit $37.1 trillion in November 2025. That's not a typo. That's 37.1. We're adding about $1 trillion every 100 days. Do the math, by late 2026, we'll be above $42 trillion if nothing changes. Interest payments are now the single largest line item in the federal budget, surpassing defense. That's how bad it is. The interest alone on past borrowing costs $1.3 trillion annually. And what's the solution? Cut spending? Nope. Raise taxes? Unpopular and politically suicidal. The only politically viable solution left? Let inflation run. Let the dollar collapse slowly, invisibly. Inflate the debt away. And gold. Gold is the antidote to that poison. That's why central banks are buying it like it's water in a burning house. And what happens when other countries, Japan, South Korea, even Germany, start seeing this dollar fragility and begin shifting just a fraction of their reserves into gold? You think 3,000 tons is a lot. You haven't seen anything yet. We're in phase 1 of a full-on monetary regime change. This is the spark. The real fire hasn't even started yet. Let me ask you something. What happens when the United States loses its last unfair advantage? I'm talking about the exorbitant privilege of printing the world's reserve currency. The privilege that lets America borrow $37 trillion at artificially low rates, even when the fundamentals are screaming banana republic. Here's the dirty secret. The dollar isn't dominant because it's strong. It's dominant because until now, there was no viable alternative. That's it, but guess what? That alternative is being built in real time, and it's being built on a foundation of gold. BRICS is just the beginning. What's coming next is something far more terrifying. Regional monetary coalitions, backed by gold and hard assets, designed specifically to bypass the dollar entirely. Case in point, Africa. You haven't heard about it yet, but the African Union is quietly working on a pan-African settlement system. Guess what backs it? Not dollars. Not euros. Gold. Latin America? Brazil and Argentina have been in talks about a joint currency since 2023. The Saudis? They're selling oil to China in yuan. But behind the yuan, there's gold. See the pattern? These aren't accidents. These are chess moves. And America's still playing checkers. The United States is so addicted to dollar privilege that it doesn't realize it's already losing it. In 2025, 28% of international trade was settled outside the dollar, up from just 16% in 2018. That's a 75% increase in under a decade. At this pace, we'll breach 50% before 2030. That's game over. Because once half the world no longer needs dollars to trade, global demand for treasuries collapses. The US will still need to borrow trillions every year. But the buyers? Gone. And when demand vanishes, yields explode, bond prices crash. The Fed steps in to buy the bonds. And how does the Fed buy bonds? By printing more dollars. And what does that do? Exactly what every central bank buying gold today is trying to avoid: hyperinflation. It's not a question of if anymore. The architecture of a post-dollar world is already under construction. Every gold bar a central bank adds to its reserves is a brick in the foundation of that system. And when the moment comes when the dollar finally loses its reserve status, everything changes overnight. Your dollars won't just be worth less. They'll be worth nothing. What nobody wants to admit, especially in Washington, is that we are already in the early stages of stealth default. Yeah, I said it. A quiet, inflationary default on the U.S. national debt. And central banks? They're treating gold as the exit hatch. Now you might be thinking, wait, the U.S. hasn't missed a payment. That's not default. Technically, you're right. But here's the truth. Default doesn't have to look like Argentina. It doesn't have to mean missed payments and riots in the street. It can look like this: paying back creditors in dollars that are worth 20%, 30%, 50% less than when they were borrowed. That's theft with a smile. Legal, painless looking, and completely intentional. In fact, it's policy. Let me give you numbers. The average yield on 10-year U.S. Treasuries is around 4.6% right now. Meanwhile, real inflation based on shadow stats-style calculations that include food, energy, housing is running closer to 10%. That means if you're holding treasuries, you're losing purchasing power every single day. That's a stealth default. And if you're a central bank sitting on $200 billion in U.S. debt, you're not going to sit there and take that loss forever. You're going to rotate out, and you're going to do it silently, carefully, so you don't spook the market. That's exactly what they're doing. Since 2022, foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries have declined by over $700 billion. Quiet selling, but massive. So where's that money going? It's not going to euros, it's not going to yen, it's going to gold, physical gold. The asset that can't default, can't inflate away, and can't be frozen by a vindictive State Department. Think about it. Why do you think countries like Hungary, Serbia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan are suddenly among the top gold buyers? These aren't G7 giants. These are emerging market players who've seen what happens when currencies collapse, and they're not waiting to become the next Argentina or Lebanon. They're getting out now, and if you think the U.S. will never default, remember this. In 1971, Nixon defaulted on America's gold obligations. That was a default. In 1933, Roosevelt defaulted on gold redemption rights. Another default. These weren't minor events. They were world-shifting, and they happened under pressure. The pressure we're under now: massive debt, no fiscal discipline, and rising inflation. This is how it begins. Quietly, slowly, and then all at once. When the revaluation hits, gold won't just be a hedge. It'll be the lifeboat, and central banks are already on board. There's something else going on that almost no one's talking about. And if you miss this, you miss the entire strategy behind the 3,000-ton gold accumulation. Central banks aren't just buying gold. They're repatriating it, quietly, carefully, and urgently. Let me explain. For decades, countries stored their gold overseas, mostly in New York, Federal Reserve vaults, and London, Bank of England. Why? Trust, global stability. The idea was that if your gold was stored in the West, it was safe. Well, that illusion shattered in 2012 when Germany requested to repatriate 674 tons of gold from the U.S. and was told it would take 7 years, to return what supposedly belonged to them. That raised a lot of eyebrows. And now, it's happening everywhere. In 2023, Turkey withdrew all its gold held at the Bank of England. Hungary repatriated 100% of its reserves. Venezuela, despite sanctions, demanded its gold back. The Netherlands moved 31% of its gold to Amsterdam, and announced plans to build a massive domestic vault by 2025. Why are they doing this? Because they know what's coming. In a financial war where currencies collapse and assets get frozen, if your gold isn't physically under your control, you don't own it. Period. Now think about that in context. If central banks were just buying gold to hedge inflation, they wouldn't care where it's stored. But they do care. They're spending billions to build domestic storage. That tells you this isn't about price. It's about sovereignty, control, preparing for a future where global trust disintegrates and every nation fends for itself. And here's where it gets dark. In a crisis scenario, the first thing every government does is close the exits. That means capital controls, asset freezes, bans on gold exports. If your central bank's gold is sitting in another country, good luck getting it back. That's why the repatriation wave is more terrifying than the purchase wave. It means they're not just preparing for monetary instability. They're preparing for monetary war, a future where trust breaks down, the dollar collapses, and every country retreats into its own bunker, with its own gold, behind its own walls. That's not just a hedge, that's a survival strategy. And if central banks are thinking this way, you should be too. All right. Here's what you've been waiting for. The final reason. The most sensitive, the most classified, and the one the mainstream media will never talk about publicly. The 3,000 tons of central bank gold purchased in just 3 years. It's not just about inflation. It's not just about de-dollarization. It's not even just about preparing for a monetary reset. No, that's the surface. The real reason, the one buried deep in the vaults of intelligence reports and off-the-record G20 briefings, is that the US dollar system has become a geopolitical liability. And the next global crisis, whether it's kinetic war, cyber war, or a systemic financial shock, will start as a liquidity freeze and end as a complete confidence collapse. And central banks aren't preparing for it. They're planning around it. I'll explain. In April 2024, the US Treasury conducted an internal stress test with a scenario they never expected to have to model, a multi-front asset freeze event. Imagine China invades Taiwan, Iran attacks Israel, and a cyber attack hits the SWIFT network. All within 48 hours. You think that's sci-fi? It's not. That's literally the scenario modeled by DARPA and NATO joint defense exercises in 2023. And here's what the simulation showed. A 60% drop in global dollar settlement volumes in less than a week. Treasury markets froze. Euro-dollar swaps collapsed. Cross-border transactions failed. And the kicker? It didn't take bombs. Just distrust. That's how fragile the system is. One rumor, one glitch, one satellite goes offline, and suddenly no one wants to hold paper. You want settlement you can verify. Instantly. No counterparty risk. No we'll settle in T+2. No let me call my bank. You want real money. And there's only one form of real money recognized across every military, every regime, and every continent: physical gold. That's why NATO classified gold as a Tier 1 strategic continuity asset in a white paper that's never been publicly released but was leaked in part to European defense officials in early 2025. That's why China has built 3 new gold vaults since 2022, including one under PLA control in Sichuan. Not under the central bank. Under military control. Ask yourself, why would China's military be storing bullion if this was just about monetary policy? It's not. They're preparing for a bifurcated world. One where the East settles trade in gold, not dollars. One where US financial sanctions become irrelevant, because the West has no leverage left. And one where the first few countries to secure gold dominance become the new monetary superpowers in a fractured post-dollar order. You think this is extreme? Then explain this. In January 2025, the Central Bank of the UAE signed a bilateral agreement with India allowing oil settlement in gold grams, not rupees, not dollars. That's real. Quiet. Hidden in footnotes. But monumental. It's the first nail in the petrodollar's coffin, nailed with a bullion bar. Once settlement moves to gold, the US loses its ability to control global trade through banking rails. Game over. And when that shift happens, and it's happening now, you won't get a warning bell. There won't be a CNN headline that says gold standard returns. No. You'll just wake up one morning and gold will be $10,000 an ounce. Then $15,000, then $20,000. And your savings? Still in dollars? Still in 401ks? Still in treasury bonds? You'll be the collateral damage, the footnote in someone else's strategy. Meanwhile, central banks who front-ran the collapse, who bought quietly, who repatriated in advance, will control the only real currency left standing. Gold. That's not a theory. That's a contingency plan. And the fact that they've already bought 3,000 tons means the clock is almost out. You're not going to get another warning. Because by the time the government admits it's collapsing the dollar, it's already done. The revaluation will hit overnight. One Friday, gold's $2,800. Monday morning, it's $20,000. Treasury yields spike. Bond markets freeze. The dollar's purchasing power implodes. And you're locked out. Retirement? Gone. Savings? Vaporized. Bank accounts? Frozen, taxed, means tested, if they're even solvent. Meanwhile, the central banks will be sitting on 3,000 tons of gold, suddenly worth 10 times more. They'll erase trillions in debt without lifting a finger. And the wealth? It won't just transfer. It'll be stolen out from under the people who trusted dollars, trusted bonds, trusted the system. This is not fear porn. This is math. This is policy. This is history repeating itself with terrifying precision. So ask yourself right now, are you going to keep holding paper they can print? Or are you going to hold the metal they can't? Because once this resets, once gold is revalued and the dollar is sacrificed, there is no undo button. You will either be aligned with the central banks, or you'll be their liquidity. Choose, while you still can.